The government says that buying unsold condos in BC is not a bailout. Critics say it absolutely is. But honestly, I think both sides are missing the bigger problem. Last week, the BC and federal governments announced this plan to buy a bunch of unsold new condos in BC. The idea is buy these units, turn them into affordable rent-to-own homes, and help people who can't get into the market. And immediately, people went after them. News outlets, politicians, and the public called it a bailout for developers. Premier David Eby and Prime Minister Mark Carney, they pushed back and they said basically, no, this is not a bailout. This is about affordability. Well, I was recently on Chris Walker's CBC radio show, No Relation, and we talked about this briefly. But it was a short segment, and this issue deserves more than a soundbite. So here's my take. The government needs to get out of the housing industry, or at least stop pretending that it can tax, restrict, regulate, and then buy its way into affordability. Because the problem is not just that these condos are unsold. The problem is why they became so expensive and so hard to sell in the first place. And in my opinion, that comes down to one thing that people don't talk about enough. Homes cost too much to build. And once you understand that, this whole condo buying plan starts to look less like a solution and more like the government trying to clean up a mess that it helped create. Everybody is stuck on the word bailout. Is it a bailout? Is it not a bailout? And I get why people are asking that. If the government steps in and buys unsold product from private developers, of course, people are going to question that. But the more important question is, why are these brand new condos sitting unsold in the first place? Because if these units were actually affordable for the people that they were supposedly built for, they probably wouldn't need the government to step in. And that's the part that people skip. We don't have an empty condo problem first. We have a cost problem first. The units are expensive because land is expensive, labor is expensive, materials are expensive, financing is expensive. And then the government adds fees, charges, levies, taxes, delays, and requirements on top of that. And then everybody acts shocked when the final price is unaffordable. And this is where the public gets misled, because governments love to say that the developer pays, but that's not really how pricing works. When governments add charges to a new project, they often frame it as the developer paying their fair share. And on paper, yes, the developer writes the check, but in reality, those costs have to go somewhere. And a developer has three choices. One is increase the sale price. Two, reduce what they're willing to pay for the land. And three, don't build the project. And in a lot of markets, especially when land was bought years ago or construction costs have already moved up, option two is gone. So the cost, it gets pushed on to the end price, or the project simply doesn't happen. That's why saying that the developer pays is too simplistic. The buyer pays, or worse, the buyer doesn't pay because they can't afford it. And then the home doesn't sell. And now we're full circle. Government is buying the same units that government policy helped make unaffordable. CMHC has looked at this. They've said that development charges can add tens of thousands, sometimes over $100,000 to the cost of a new home. In one CMHC report, the government fees in the city of Vancouver were listed as high as $143 a square foot for a high-rise condo. Think about that. On a 1,000 square foot unit, that's the equivalent of $143,000 before we talk about the actual construction, land, financing, profit, GST, and everything else. So when people ask, why are new condos so expensive? That is part of the answer. And this is why that I think that most housing policy misses the mark. It keeps chasing the villain instead of fixing the math. For years, every time housing got more unaffordable, there was a new villain. First, it was the foreign buyers. So we brought in a foreign buyer tax. Guess what? Homes were still unaffordable. Then it was speculators. So we brought in speculation taxes. Still unaffordable. Then it was short-term rentals. So BC completely restricted short-term rentals. Still unaffordable. Now we're looking at unsold condos and saying, okay, maybe the government should just buy them. At some point, we have to stop pretending the issue is just one group of bad actors. This is basic supply and demand. If you want prices to come down, you either increase supply or you reduce demand, or you reduce the cost of creating supply. But a lot of these policies don't really do that. They sound good, they pull well, they give politicians a villain, but they don't fix the underlying cost structure. Housing affordability is not solved by finding someone to blame. It's solved by making it cheaper, faster, and less risky to build the housing that people actually need. Now, to be fair, I don't think that every government policy has failed. There is one approach that I do think worked, and it's when governments incentivized purpose-built rentals. In Kelowna, for years, we had an extremely low vacancy. Then the government started creating incentives for rental-only buildings, property tax exemptions, CMHC financing, longer amortizations, higher loan-to-value options, lower rates. And guess what happened? Builders responded. They built rentals, and Kelowna's vacancy rate moved way up. And that's not because a few short-term rental condos came back on the market. That may have helped a little bit, sure. But the bigger factor was the supply, actual purpose-built rentals. Right now, at any time, there's 5,000 rentals currently under construction in Kelowna. That's a lesson. Incentives create supply. Punishment, taxes, bans, and restrictions, usually they just move the problem around. And that brings us back to this condo buying plan, because now the government is trying to create affordability after the units are already built. So the government's going to buy units in buildings that are only partially sold and turn them into rent-to-own homes. Could that help some people? Maybe. I'm not saying that no one's going to benefit, but as a housing solution, I'm skeptical. They say they're going to buy these units at a great price. My question to you is, when has the government ever been known for buying things efficiently? Even if they do negotiate a discount, the bureaucracy alone is going to be expensive. Then who manages the program? Who qualifies the buyers? Who decides these rent-to-own terms? Who absorbs the losses if the math doesn't work? Who maintains the units? What happens if the buyer can't complete the purchase? What happens to the strata? There are a lot of unanswered questions. And this is why I don't love the government trying to act like a real estate investor, because real estate investors have to be disciplined. Look at REITs, which are real estate investment trusts, for example. They buy rental communities based on numbers, and they're buying a lot of these new rental communities that have been recently built. They have a duty to shareholders. They can't just overpay because it sounds good at a press conference. Government does not have that same discipline. The government, they can overpay, they can call it affordability, and then send the bill somewhere else. If the government really wants affordable homes, it should make homes easier to build and not wait so that expensive homes don't sell and then buy them. Here's what I think would help. Reduce the cost of building, speed up approvals, cut or restructure the development charges, stop layering taxes into the price of new housing, create incentives for the type of housing we actually need. Purpose-built rentals, entry-level condos, family-sized units, the missing middle, senior-friendly housing, whatever the market actually needs in that community. Stop trying to micromanage the market after the fact. If you make housing expensive to build, don't be surprised when housing is expensive to buy. And don't call it a solution when taxpayers have to step in after the math doesn't work. So, is this condo plan a bailout? You can decide that. But to me, the bigger issue is the government keeps trying to solve housing affordability at the end of the process. After the land is bought, after the fees are added, after the approvals are delayed, after the units are built, and after the prices are unaffordable. Then the buyers disappear. That's too late. Affordability, it has to be built into the system from the beginning. And right now, too much policy does the opposite. It adds costs. It adds delays, it adds risks, and then it acts surprised when the final product is unaffordable. If you want more plain English breakdowns of what's actually happening in the Kelowna condo market, subscribe to the channel. If you want to talk to me about the condo market or any market, reach out. You'll find the link in the description below. Because the next time the government says that it's making housing more affordable, the first question should be, are they actually lowering the cost of housing? Or are they just moving the cost somewhere else? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.